we're going to get started on today is we're going to talk about AIS. So first thing is to ask ourselves is what does AIS stand for? Automatic Identification System. Just a little bit for context for everyone in the room. Some of you might know us, some of you might not. I'm Jeff Cote with Pacific Yacht Systems, and I'm an owner-operator of a marine electrical and electronic company here in Vancouver, and also Sunshine Coast and now Vancouver Island. And our main focus is strictly electrical and electronics for marine. So we have about a dozen of us on the team, and today what I'm doing is I'm sharing our collective experience of working on all your fellow boaters' boats. So last year we did about 750 boats that we worked on. And what I'm trying to share with everyone are what are the benefits and why are some other boaters or fellow boaters taking on AIS on their boat, and why are they doing it, and what are the benefits, and what are some of the products you can consider for your own boat. All right, so first thing, the big takeaways from the presentation are going to be, for me, is, at the end of the presentation, you should ask yourself, how does AIS improve my vessel safety? So that should be one of the points that we want to cover in this presentation. The next one is, what about the location of an AIS antenna? Do I need one? Do I use a VHF antenna? Do I buy a splitter? We're going to talk about that. Also talk about if you can use a VHF antenna for AIS. Maybe talk a little bit about EMI, but we're going to dabble into that a little bit. First thing, what's the purpose and why are people talking about AIS for boats? Ultimately, the real purpose, if you want to say it in a nutshell, is it's for safety. It's about positional awareness of your boat and other people's boat that can be seen on a display. We'll talk about the different sort of displays, but it's really about sharing information of where your boat is, its current location and where it's going between all boats. So everyone's aware of where everyone is on the water. So it's vessel to vessel, vessel to shore. And it's a it's a broadcast of information, but not a continuous stream of information, meaning depending on the type of transponder that you have on your boat, there's different frequencies. So you might be updating every 3 minutes, 6 minutes. It's not constantly saying, here I am, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, right? So this information is there, but it's not like your sight. Your sight is constantly giving you feedback where someone is. The speed of light travels instantly for what we notice. And so you're always being updated on where someone is. But with AIS, it's giving you a sample. Otherwise, the VHF frequencies would be too cluttered. So it's telling you where a boat is every 3 minutes. And eventually, with that information, you can figure where the boat is going to be. But it's not going to tell you where it was every second, because otherwise, there's just be simply too much boating information on the app. So one example of that is someone who turns on their AIS receiver and instantly looks at an app on their phone and wonder why their AIS vessel is not on the app. Well, it's not. The moment you turn it on, it takes a while before it broadcasts. A ship station or a shore station is going to pick it up, send it to the internet. You're going to connect to the internet on your app, and then you're going to see this vessel. So you got to give it a little bit of time. It's not real time. Radar would be the opposite. Radar is in real time. When the one sweep happens, it tells you every time where that boat is, every sweep. So what are you going to see with AIS? You're going to see surrounding traffic. You're going to see local commercial traffic. So here in British Columbia, the things that you're going to see are going to be all the freighters. Most tugboats are going to be using it. A lot of trawlers, fishing trawlers are going to be using it. And you're going to be seeing a lot of information, like what's the boat name? Where's the boat? Some of them even take the time to actually enter where they're going. What's their speed on ground? What's the length of the boat, the width of the boat, the speed of the boat? All that information is sent over VHF frequencies within a subset of VHF, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And that information is appearing on your boat. There's different ways of harnessing or getting that information, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you're getting all that over the air. So what that means is you could literally be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the farthest point from land on Earth, have no internet connectivity, though everything has fallen. There is nothing left on Earth, and two ships will be able to communicate directly via VHF frequencies. So it's not dependent on going back to land to come back to your boat. It's boat to boat. There's no central governing body that's filtering the information, processing the information. Your boat is listening to all other boats like a VHF, and it's also sending to all other boats that have a AIS receiver. So it's an any-to-any, which is great because that means that you could be on the Central Coast where, you know, VHF reception is not that great, or internet reception is not that great, you know, places in the Browns or Princess Louisa, or in a pass going up Seymour's Pass, or it could be any pass. And any boat that has an AIS transponder that's actually broadcasting their location and their direction is going to actually appear on your AIS receiver. So ultimately there are, and we'll talk about that a little bit, I want to kind of go into it, there are boats that are required to have AIS. Those are called Class A AIS systems or transponders, and those boats don't have a choice to have them on, and they do, and they're always turned on. And that's why when you look at an AIS app on your phone, you can actually see all these commercial vessels that are showing up on your app. This year for Christmas, spent my time on the boat at Christmas in the Gulf Islands and up in the channels between Valdez and Thetis Island and the Secretary Islands. There's a lot of commercial ships there actually just anchored. Great place, right? It's protected, relatively shallow. And I was like looking at all these ships and I was like, oh my God, these ships are huge. How big are they? Where are they from? What are their names? So even at a distance, as it was coming through Gabriel Pass, I could see them at a distance. I was like, I wonder how many there are. And with my line of sight, I could only see 2, but on my AIS, I could actually see 7 of them. Because VHF is more than line of sight, right? VHF will work over mountains. Radar is only line of sight. It can only see what it sees. If it's behind an island, like for example, Active Pass, you cannot see on the other side of Active Pass on either side of it, right? You can only see. But with AIS, for example, when I light up AIS on my own boat and I'm in Pender Harbor, I can see ferries or a BC ferry leaving Sultry Bay, either Powell River to Sunshine Coast. You don't see the ferry, but you can actually see the ferry, BC ferries on your chart plotter. And the other thing that's really handy, but you have to be careful, is this feature called collision alarm. So if the AIS knows your speed, it knows your course on ground, and this is speed on ground, course on ground, and it knows another vessel's speed on ground and course on ground, it can predict a collision within a certain amount of time. In 7 minutes, if both boats do not change course, do not change speed, you will collide with that boat. And if you have an AIS on board, you can say, by the way, I want you to give me a 20-minute window, a 10-minute window, a 5-minute window of an imminent collision. Now, if you have that feature enabled in the river, for example, your AIS will beep nonstop. Because the AIS does not understand that you're in a body of water that is only 40 meters wide, and there are freighters coming at you from all directions all the time, and they think you're going to be in an imminent collision. They don't understand that you're in a river and there's commercial traffic coming right beside you. So you're going to be constantly disabling the AIS alarm because it's going to be saying, oh my God, collision alert, collision alert, collision alert. You're within so much proximity of a huge freighter that's coming down the south arm of the Fraser. So at one point what you have to be careful about is not disabling the alarms all the time. So in the river, or if you're in a port or in False Creek, for example, you turn up an AIS system, there's tons of vessels that leave their AIS on all the time. So if you're I don't know, moored in Quayside Marina, there's probably 7 or 8 boats in that marina that have their AIS all the time. So you might get false alarms. So you want to make sure that you turn your AIS on when you need it and maybe disable it when you're at an anchor or you're in the South African Fraser, because you're going to have too many false positives or false negatives. So this is sort of a little bit of a diagram to show really what it comes down to. For the most part, when you're on the water, you really care about ship to ship, and that's all that matters. Sort of a little bit what I was talking about earlier, this any-to-any phenomenon, right? You don't need anybody else to be broadcasting this information. Like, you can actually talk VHF to VHF in the Broughtons without having even a nearby Coast Guard station to receive the signal. But if you do have, or in reception of a shore-based VHF station, like a Coast Guard, and they see your boat, They're going to take that information, send it over the internet, and then you can then look on an app and look where that boat is. So you could actually confirm that your boat is in that location. I have owners or boat owners that have multiple partners of a boat. And sometimes they're wondering, oh, where's my partner? Where are they in Destination Sound? Are they coming back? Are they on schedule? Are they safely at their destination? Did they make it to Prado? Are they in the Discovery Islands? And they can simply log in and they don't have to call. They don't have to ask. They just go, AIS, they look, oh yeah, the boat's in Prado Haven. All's good. So it's a way for other people, if you choose, to see your location. Obviously there's a silent mode, meaning you can actually go incognito and say, I actually want to receive all AIS information, but for some reason I don't want to transmit it. We did AIS systems for a mining company that was actually in the Congo, and they wanted to receive it, but they didn't want to know where they were, because there were some risks for other people to know that they were coming down the river. And so they would disable or enable the AIS transponder at will. And so that's a feature on some devices as well, that you can actually turn it on and turn it off depending. So a little bit earlier I mentioned that there's really two types of AIS systems. For all of us, unless you're a commercial boat operator and you've got a huge freighter or whatnot, but if you have a recreational vessel, either powerboat or sailboat, you're going to be, and you decide to have AIS on board and you want to have a transponder, you're going to be having what's called a Class B transponder. So you're not required to have one, but you choose to have one. A receiver doesn't matter. A receiver is a receiver. It will always receive Class A or Class B. It'll listen to all sorts of vessels, but when you choose to buy one that actually tells other boaters where you are, where you're going, your boat name and all that, for us here in the recreational market, you're going to be looking at a Class B device. About 5, 6, 7, maybe about 6 years ago, a VHF manufacturer called Standard Horizon came out with a AIS receive-only VHF radio. It was called the Matrix 2100, and that was probably the first affordable product for AIS for recreational boaters. I have one on my boat. And that was about $450 for a VHF with a built-in AIS receiver. So it was really handy. You could actually see AIS targets directly on the radio. You could connect that AIS, that radio, to your chart plotter, and on your chart plotter you would see all these targets light up. So for give you an example, I can be lighting up AIS and I can be in Captain's Cove, south arm of the Fraser and Ladner, and I will see targets in the Gulf Islands, targets tons of commercial traffic in Burrard Inlet. I'll see the ferries leave Howe Sound off of Horseshoe Bay. So that's starting to be pretty big reach. We're talking 20, 30, 40 nautical miles of reach over VHF frequencies on a boat in Ladner, receiving all that information overlaid on top of your chart plotter. And that's handy because as you're going through, for example, and maybe if you're in a powerboat or sailboat, you're not going all that fast anyway, so you can't really modify your speed. You're going from dead slow to dead slow anyways. But for powerboaters, you might be deciding to when are you going to go through a pass, an active pass. You might be seeing a ferry come in from the other side. And you're like, you know what, I'm just going to wait it out. Like if I wait 3 minutes, there's going to be no ferry in the pass, and I can go how I want to go. So you can make decisions. Same things with Dod Narrows. Coming up from De Courcy, we were there for 2 days before New Year's and coming up to Nanaimo, and I wanted to see, is there any commercial traffic on the other sides of Dod Narrows that are going to be towing log booms from Nanaimo down in the Gulf Islands? Well, radar would never tell me what's on the other side of Dod Narrows because Dod Narrows is kind of like an S bend. I can't see the other side. It's not like Portelier Pass. So how do you know? Well, looking at an AIS receiver, I can see if there's commercial traffic on the other side. I can see if they're just waiting, if they're coming in for the pass. And then I can decide, oh yeah, no problem. We can go in through the pass. There's no other boats on the other side. Because Dod Narrows, I'm not sure for some of you not familiar, it's a pretty very constricted, very tight passage. It's probably one of the smallest ones here on the coast, with maybe Princess Louisa being a close second. So, you know, taking that information, that's really useful. So AIS is a specific frequency range within a VHF range. So what does that mean is VHF is a large range of frequencies. AIS is a specific range within that VHF range. Meaning, you can, first of all, buy an AIS-only antenna. What would that mean? It would be an antenna that does only those two frequencies and is built for those two frequencies alone. So you can have an AIS antenna, obviously working off and feeding an AIS receiver or transponder. You can have a VHF antenna working and feeding an AIS receiver or transponder, but the corollary is not true. You cannot have an AIS antenna work on a VHF radio because the VHF radio is using a larger range. The AIS is working a subset of that range. So, before I go into choosing a little bit, because we're going to talk about splitters, do I buy one or not? First thing is, there are certain inherent limitation about AIS. At the end of the day, it's similar radio reception to a VHF. So for example, when I was on the outside of Vancouver Island and I was north of Brooks Peninsula, south of Quatsino Sound, there was practically no VHF reception on where I was. There are certain places where you just simply don't have good VHF reception. If you have no good VHF reception, you're not going to see AIS targets on your chart plotter because simply the limitation. Remember, this is not satellite. You know, the information is not going up into the air, coming back down at you. It's going line of sight. Mind you, VHF does allow for certain curvatures. It will go over relatively not too high mountains, right? You can go over the Gulf Islands. They're rather pretty low profile, but it's not going to be, you're not going to be in Princess Louisa surrounded in basically the version of San Andreas's 2,000 meter cliffs around you get great VHF reception, and you're not going to be seeing boats in the Strait of Georgia in Princess Louisa. So know the limitations, right? It's about VHF. And then generally in open water is around 20 to 30 miles, and it all depends on the height of the antenna, right? That's why sailboaters choose to mount their VHF antenna on the top of the mast. It's the curvature of the earth. I was just not too long ago, a month ago, I was in Jedediah, and it never ceases to amaze me as you look, you can't even see Vancouver from Jedediah, but you can see the top of Baker. And Baker is only about half the height it is. So the whole of Vancouver, and that's not that far, that's only 50 nautical miles. There's no buildings. Even if you're with binoculars, it's not the question if you can't see it with, you could have the most high-powered binocular you want. The curvature of the earth is enough that all the skyscrapers of Vancouver are gone. You can't even see Burnaby. See part of Burnaby in the end, some of the high rises, and then Baker is going to be in the background. So with that in mind, think about generally what they're expecting is they're expecting a AIS to go about 20 to 30 miles reach on open water because of the curvature of the earth, okay? And also because a Class B transponder doesn't use as much power, the reach of a Class B transponder is going to be even less than that. So that's why when you're in open water and your radar might be able to see further depending on the height and where your antenna is located, you're not going to see Class B transponders 100 miles away from one another. You might be able to talk to one another via SSB, right? Or you might have satellite connection to one another via phone and you know each other's coordinates, but you might not be able to see one another. So one of the first dilemmas installing an AIS system or thinking about an AIS system on your boat is going to be, do I reuse my existing VHF antenna that I already have? Because most of us should have a VHF antenna on our boat. If you don't, you should get that before you buy an AIS system. And no, a portable handheld VHF radio is not sufficient. And so then the question you're going to ask is, I want to have an AIS antenna as high as possible, but on some boats, like for example a sailboat, it's pretty complicated. Where are you going to mount that second AIS antenna? You can't put it parallel or right beside the VHF antenna. There has to be a certain amount of vertical distance or horizontal separation between two VHF antennas. And so on a sailboat, what most owners end up doing, they choose a compromise and they say, okay, I'm going to have an AIS antenna at the top of my mast, and what I'm going to use is a splitter, and that's an image of a splitter, but it's not just simply a passive splitter, it's an active splitter, which means it's powered, and so it minimizes the loss, because whenever you take something and you separate it, you're going to have some loss. So it's powered and it's amplified so you don't lose too much of the signal. And so you're going to have VHF antenna going to the top of the mast. Then one cable is going to go to your VHF radio. Another cable is going to go to your AIS transponder receiver. And another cable might go to your FM AM radio. So one antenna does 3 things. So that's one way to do it. On power boaters that have an arch, right, or simply 2 sides of the cabin, you'll see generally a lot of times you'll see those boats have 2 VHF radios, one lower helm, one upper helm, and they'll put an antenna on the starboard side and an antenna on the port side. Or they're going to have a single VHF antenna, AMF antenna on the other side, and they have a single VHF with a dual station, you know, an ICOM remote mic. And so that's easy. Then what we end up doing is installing a dedicated AIS antenna on the opposite side of the VHF antenna. And so naturally, certainly the best antenna for your boat is a dedicated AIS antenna because it's going to be built for a purpose. You can use a VHF antenna to do it, but it's not going to be as good as a dedicated. Now, honestly, I would say it's probably 50-50. Some people are okay with the compromise because the cost of an additional antenna, running the cable, everything else. So what owners or boat owners are doing is they're saying, I'm going to live with what I have. It's not the best of everything, but I'll buy an active splitter. And that's about, I can't remember, about $300, that splitter. And I'm going to use the existing antenna that I have, and I'll split it to 3 places, or at least 2, my VHF and my AIS transponder or receiver. So this is a sort of, I kind of brought that up a little bit earlier. I said, what sort of information are you going to see on this AIS? What are the, you know, it's sort of like a business card. You know, you're sharing business card between different boat owners, and you're doing it over the air. Like, what's your MMSI, right? That's sort of like a social insurance number for a boat. It's a special, unique identifier for a boat. There's no 2 other boats that have the same number. You're going to have your vessel name, your vessel type, right? The length of it, the width of it, the speed, the course on ground. You're going to see maybe 20, 30 parameters depending on Class A or Class B. And then that information, you can actually click on that vessel. I want to see that vessel and tell me all the information of that vessel. And then when it's time to actually contact that vessel, maybe you want to communicate something with that vessel. Say, by the way, we're on a collision. I'm going to do this. You know, it's a big ship. They're going to do what they're doing anyways. So you're just letting them know that I'm going to go out of your way or something. You can actually contact that vessel and know what its call sign is. So you're not saying, hey, big black boat over there, south of me, 20 miles. All this information is irrelevant. They don't know big. You need to know what's the boat name, you know, where are they going, like their call sign. And then that way someone in the bridge is going to be like able to respond instead of trying to, who are you talking to with VHF, right? It's an everybody's listening to VHF, so they don't know when you're calling that you're calling for them. On modern chart plotters, some companies now are allowing you to directly click on a target and they'll initiate a call on your VHF to that target. So they'll set up a private channel between the two and they'll ring the other boat on VHF and it'll say right away. That's kind of pretty sophisticated. Most of us are not going to do that, but that's one of the features of some of the latest and greatest navigation systems integrated with the AIS transponders built into the display. The other thing that's really important, and some people think that doesn't matter, well, if you've got a boat that's 1 feet by 1 feet by 1 feet, or a bathtub that's 3 feet by 2 feet, the location of your GPS antenna is irrelevant in that boat. At the end of the day, it's within the margin of error of GPS accuracy. But if you're starting to have a bigger boat in a 50, 60, 40, 100, 90, 145 foot boat, they're trying to predict if there's going to be a collision, and if the antenna's at the back of the boat or the front of the boat, that's going to make a big difference. So when you're actually setting up an AIS system on your boat, you've got to say, where's that GPS antenna? Because they want to figure out if the 2 boats, remember it's not 2 GPS antennas they're going to need to hit, it's 2 boats. The boats are bigger than the GPS antennas. So it's absolutely essential to take the time to enter those values in, because otherwise you might cause a collision, or if you enter inaccurate numbers, you might have a collision because you've underestimated your boat, or you said that your boat started at the end when it started at the beginning. And so then a collision that on the screen is not going to happen actually happens in real life. The bigger the boat, the more important it is. Absolutely. Okay? When you're dealing with AIS and you're trying to get a lot of information, you've got to be careful about EMI, electromagnetic interference. And it's going to be more prevalent than on VHF. Your VHF might be staticky, but remember, all this data, digital data, is now transmitted, more than just voice, on this line. And so there's certain things that you've got to be careful in. That I've seen boats where they lived with the VHF crackling, but when they install an AIS, that's actually limiting the input of the information, because now the EMI is affecting the AIS information sent over VHF. So sometimes, rarely, but sometimes we encounter boats where, the VHF, they could live with it not working great, but now that the AIS is on board, it's actually not working properly because the AIS can't tolerate all this EMI on the line. So you've got to just be cognizant when you're running a VHF line, what is running parallel to that VHF line, right? Because you can have some interference related to that. Yes?
Any difference between aluminum and plastic boats on that?
No. It's about other conductors. The question is if there's any difference between an aluminum or plastic boat. The real issue is other conductors, other cables, right? Being electronics or inverter wiring that are running parallel to your VHF, right? As much as possible, you would never want to put a VHF coaxial cable in a bundle running beside an inverter line. You want to run always perpendicular as much as possible, given a choice. I know it's limited in a boat. You can't do always what you want, but try to avoid these problems if you are having these problems. And these are some ways to do that. This is kind of like the tips and tricks. By the way, this presentation is going to be posted on our website under the media, under a PDF. I sometimes go a little bit more detail in some of the sections. But if you have EMI problems, and only about 5% or maybe 10% of you would, this would be some way on your boat, kind of tips and tricks on how to identify the problem, isolate it, and maybe then rectify it. All right. So there's multiple AIS transponders out there, and there's a lot of companies that do it. First of all, it's sort of like a VHF. You can buy a VHF radio from ICOM, from Standard Horizon, Uniden, and then you can buy one from Garmin, from Raymarine. I don't think Furuno makes one. Simrad makes one. Right, you can buy our VHF radio from many manufacturers. When I get asked by other boaters and they say, Jeff, what's the best VHF radio you can buy? What I always recommend to other boaters is, first of all, you should buy a product where the company's sole purpose is doing that device. So meaning, if it's time for me to buy a VHF radio, I'm going to buy a VHF radio from a company that does VHF. And ICOM and Standard Horizon's main purpose in life, everyone in that company, top down, does VHF. You might think that it's smart for you to buy a VHF from Raymarine because you have a Raymarine chart plotter, but nobody knows VHF better than ICOM or Standard Horizon because that's their sole purpose in life, is to make VHF radios. And with that line of thought, when it comes to an AIS transponder, my recommendation is to buy an AIS transponder from a company whose sole purpose is to do AIS. And so there's multiple companies that do that. There's even one in Vancouver that does it as well. And there are companies out there that actually focus solely on doing AIS transponders and receivers. That's all they do. That's what they wake up in the morning, they think about. That's what they do every day, night in, day out. So when you're purchasing one of those devices, I encourage you to buy from a company that does it. That's it. And you'll get much better value, better support, and they understand the details or the intricacies of actually doing an AIS transponder. So one of the really populars, and the one I have on my boat now, is Vesper. And here's why I like it. It comes with really 3 different things, and I'll talk about some of the different choices. First of all, it's collision avoidance, right? Or collision prevention. So that's where the transponders are actually sending information to one another. You're receiving that information. You can decide how big of a circle. Do you want a 20-minute warning, a 5-minute warning? What is it that you want? You want silent, non-silent? You can decide all these parameters because, you know, open water, you're going to put yourself a bigger bubble, maybe in tighter quarters. You're like, I'm on the bridge, I've got good visibility. You know, go silent, I'm in the river. There's going to be ships that are going to be looking like they're going to collide with me all the time, but it's not our fault because we're just following the river. So that's really good. The other thing too that they have built in, which I really like, because remember, an AIS transponder has to have a built-in, has to have its own dedicated GPS. That's the code. These devices have really low power requirements, or power draw, so most boat owners leave them on all the time. They're drawing 0.2 amps, 0.1 amps. Your an halogen light bulb on your boat is drawing 2 amps. A chart plotter is 3 amps. If you turn on the radar, it's another 5, 10 amps. This is 0.1, 0.2. It's the amount of power that it takes to draw an LED anchor light. So you leave it on for 24 hours, you're going to draw 4 amp hours, 5 amp hours. This is very small power draw. And with that power draw, what you can get is all this AIS information, and because it has a built-in GPS, you can actually have an anchor watch, meaning you can show if you're dragging anchor, right? Because it's constantly monitoring your location as a function of the point that you drop the anchor at. And the other thing too is it even has a man overboard function. So those would be the 3 reasons why you would consider Vesper. These are sort of, Vesper came out, and I think it was about this fall. They were in our office and they were showing, they also have this thing now where they're actually, and they won actually Best of Show here at the Vancouver Boat Show, Best Electronic AIS System. Best electronic system in the Vancouver Boat Show was the Vesper that I'm going to show you next slide, the XP8000. So it takes all this information from your boat, like your speed on ground, your wind indicators, anything that's digital over NMEA. On my boat, it's even CTOC, but you can convert CTOC to NMEA 2000. We'll take all that information, depth, wind speed, whatever, takes it, and then it will take it and it will act as a gateway. It will then propagate it over a localized Wi-Fi network. And if you have an Android watch, that Android watch will actually show you literally on your watch wind speed, your anchor, if you're drifting, man overboard, collision AIS, everything is going to be shown directly on your watch. On top of on an iPad and an iPhone, which has been doing forever, which is really nice. So you can actually even do software updates. You think about some of the old electronics that you have on your boat where it takes a while, you got to do software at home, put it on a compact flash card, an SD card, bring it to the boat, do a software update. Well, now what they're doing is they'll let you do a software update directly from your phone, and your phone's connected to the internet. So you can do software updates a lot easier. Fully waterproof. And that silence mode is really important because, like I said, in certain anchorages, like in Montague, I was there on Boxing Day. There's a lot of boats that were actually navigating, and we were leaving our AIS transponder on. A lot of boats were actually coming in, and the alarm, if I didn't have silent, they would think that we're at collision because they're coming right to the dock. And there's other boats that had AISs. So it's important if you have your AIS left on for other features that you have a silent mode. Otherwise, your AIS is going to be always thinking there might be a collision coming, right? It doesn't know you're at a dock. It just thinks you're here and there's another boat coming right at you. So this is sort of what an AIS Class B transponder looks like. It's about this big, this high, and about this thick. You don't have to, some boat owners don't have a display or don't have room for a display on their helm. Not every one of us has a huge bridge. Like I'm doing a 90-foot boat right now, and the bridge is literally 20 feet by this big, and there's a screen in every hole. So it's like 20 feet wide by 2 feet. It's just, and he wants something so there's no dead space. Sort of like a house without furniture. He wants the house with furniture. So for him, it's easy. He wants screens for everything. He wants multiple screens. He wants all of that black empty space to have something. Now that's a problem for him, but for most of us, it's the other way around. On my boat, I have a small sailboat. I don't have space for everything. I've got space for nothing. So how do I show AIS targets on my boat without having a room for a display? Well, that's why some of these devices now, well, what they'll do is they'll take the AIS information and then they'll take it, they'll transmit all the time, but if you want to see those vessels, but you don't have a screen for it, you don't have a latest, greatest chart plotter, but you still want to see AIS targets, they're going to transmit those targets to an iPad. So right on an iPad, you can see your boat location, all the data associated to your boat, relative to a simple chart plotter, GPS, without the charts, but like a base map. And then you'll be able to see, okay, here are all the other vessels around me. So it's a really affordable way for you to have an AIS or the benefits of AIS without having a fancy chart plotter on your boat.
Sir,
Yeah.
what part of that system that we see there does the data processing to say collision alarm? Is it,
The blue device right there.
oh, it's all done on that transponder, it's not done on the app? Or,
Nope. No, the app is just a portal to that information. Yeah, that's a really good question. The question was, who's thinking, what's making the decision, what's making the processing power in figuring out if there's going to be a collision between your boat and all other boats around you, right? Because it's not just another boat it sees. On my AIS, when I light it up again in the Gulf Islands, I might have 100 targets. Now, as you go more north, there's less and less of them. But around Vancouver and just in Burrard Inlet, if your boat's in Cold Harbor and you light it up, you're going to have probably 150, 200 targets that are going to light up instantly on your boat. So it's looking at all those targets and it's figuring which ones are potentially going to come into collision with your boat. And that all happens automatically. You don't have to ask for it. It's sort of like MARPA, where you have to acquire targets on a radar screen, track it for a period of time, and then it's going to tell you if you're going to get a collision. This is all done without you even looking at it, caring about it. It's all happening in the background, always happening. So it's really convenient. That device also comes with an external, really high-powered GPS. And so you can mount that GPS somewhere else. You can buy a dedicated AIS antenna, or you can buy a splitter. Or you simply have an AIS antenna already on your boat and you route it to the transponder. That device broadcasts information on a tablet, but it will also broadcast that information via NMEA 0183. So I have some boat owners that have an older Raymarine C-Series, vintage, 12 years old, 13 years old, that has an NMEA port. As long as it has an NMEA high-speed port, which is like 33,600 baud rate, you set that in, you can connect 2 wires, and suddenly on your 12-year-old chart plotter, you're going to see all those AIS targets as long as you enable overlap or overlay. So if you don't ask to see the targets, the chart plotter is not going to tell you them. You have to go in the menu, say, I want to see my AIS targets on top of my chart plotter maps. Show me all those targets. And then they're going to say, and then you can say, oh, by the way, I want you to be silent. Don't tell me when I'm alarming, I don't care, or I want you to alarm. So you can set alarms or not. And you can do that with old technology, or you can make it even easier and you can have a newer chart plotter or display and simply have NMEA 2000 and simply plug it in. Right? NMEA 2000 is kind of like a backbone, it's very easy, sort of like USB for computers. It's not complicated, you plug it in and then suddenly that information that is off of your Class B transponder is going to show up on your chart plotter, and if you want to and you're down below in your galley or I don't know, your salon and you don't feel like going up on the bridge to see other AIS targets while you're in an anchorage at night, you can simply log into your phone and you go, yeah, and you don't need internet connection to do that, by the way. This is you talking to this blue box directly over a localized Wi-Fi network. So you don't need internet. You could be in Princess Louisa and do this. You could be anywhere. You could be in Haida Gwaii on the west side. There's definitely no Wi-Fi there. You're creating your own Wi-Fi network, and this device and your device are talking to one another over your personal Wi-Fi network without internet, okay? So basically, it's like a black box AIS transponder and receiver. The real big takeaway there is that you do not need internet to see that information on your phone. Now, the flip side to that is if your phone and your boat is in Pender Harbor, you're not going to be able to load up the Vesper app, go onto Wi-Fi and see your boat, right? The Wi-Fi network for Vesper is a localized Wi-Fi network. If you want to see your boat, and your boat, like my boat's in Secret Cove, and I want to see my boat in Secret Cove, and I left my transponder on, and I'll show that later. There's an app that you can go on, like Ship Finder, and then you go on Ship Finder, and then you'd look, and then my AIS transponder would be sending out a signal. A shore station would get it. They know where the boat is. They'd send that information to the internet. I have my phone and app, and I go to the internet, and I get that information through the internet. Now, this is very critical. The takeaway here is that anyone, and I get this question asked to me about at least 50 times a year, people say, why would I buy an AIS transponder or receiver when I can look at AIS ship traffic on my phone? A phone, that is a gadget. It is not in real time, okay? It's sort of like knowing that your cousin Steve was in the other room 15 minutes ago. Steve was there 15 minutes ago, but where's Steve now? He could be anywhere, right? So AIS transponders that are shared over the internet are not time-stamped and telling you where the boat is in real time, right? That's what you need for collision avoidance. You need to see, when we walk between each other and we're crowds here at the boat show, we're all making decisions of moving left or right, slowing down, speeding up based on what we see in real time, right? And light travels pretty damn fast. And so we're all reacting and we're avoiding one another. If I only saw every 15 minutes and I was making my collision avoidance based on 15-minute information updates, I would be black and blue constantly. There's no way I can avoid collisions if I have 15-minute outdated information. So it's very important to realize the difference between an app, which has outdated time information, and when you have it on your boat and it's in more real time, not completely real time, because a radar is real time. Radar, every sweep of that array is telling you where something is, right? Every sweep. And AIS is not getting an update every second, it's getting an update every 3 minutes, 6 minutes, or 12 minutes. So it's a way to know where boats are, but if a boat's acting erratically, right? If it's a cigarette boat and it's got 2 teenage 18-year-olds that are boozing and they're doing donuts, like I've seen, for example, in Poets Cove, and they're doing donuts around South Pender Island and donuts in the Bay of Poets Cove, your AIS transponder is not going to help you, because nobody's predicting that someone's going 40 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour and is doing donuts in a bay. There is no prediction to where that boat is going to go. So that's where your awareness and radar and your own eyesight is going to help you avoid that ship. So this is another model, and I've used that on a lot of boats that want to have a standalone screen just for AIS targets. So they either have Rune on the bridge or something, and it's about this screen this big. It's got all the same benefits as the other one, but it's got a standalone display. Now, this is not a chart plotter. You know, when you buy, for example, a Garmin chart plotter nowadays, or even a Navionics one, it might have what's called base map. That is not charts. There is no sounding information, there's no shoals, there's no reefs. You would never ever navigate with a base map. It's sort of telling you where Bowen is and maybe where Gambier is, and Gambier might be kind of like a big blob as opposed to, you know, the way Gambier is, it's got like 3 big bays. Like everything is kind of crude indication. So if you look at that down there, it's going to give you some sort of indication where land is, but you would never make your piloting decisions based on base map information. Okay, so it's simply an overlay of free information that is not too intense for charting, right? It's giving you that information to put you a positional awareness, but you would never use this as a chart plotter. This is not a chart plotter. It's base map with AIS information overlaid on top. On my standard Horizon, the one I said that I had about 6 years ago, there was simply no base map at all. It's sort of like a radar screen, right? A radar screen, if you're in the middle of the ocean, it's going to show you land, but it's not going to show you everything. It's land that's high enough so the radar hits it, right? If the land is very low or barely, it's not going to show you shoals. It's not going to show you reefs. It's not going to show you rocks at high tide that are covered. All that information is not seen from a radar. That's the stuff that you get from a chart plotter that has a full chart set, right? Like Blue Charts or Navionics or CMAP or a CHF raster charts, whatever those are. But you can have that information, and then you can see literally the other boats on the chart plotter, and some boats are actually going to start different colors. If they're white, everything's fine. They're behind you, they're going the opposite direction, you'll never see each other, you're both there, but you'll never come into collision. But sometimes what they'll do is they'll show you, like in this picture, by the way, there's a red boat, it's not red, but this boat is on a collision course with you. So you might want to change course. Who's got the right of way? You've got to start making your decisions. Another thing that's really handy is these new devices. For some of you that boat either only as a couple or solo, if you ever fall overboard, how are other people going to find you? Right? So especially if there's only 2 people on board, I bring that up because when someone falls on board and you're a sailboat and crew, one person is designated as a spotter. Someone throws something overboard, right? Man overboard. Right? There's a whole sequence, but this is a team effort. If there's 2 of you on board and one person falls overboard, let's be honest, it's going to be full-on chaos, okay? It's going to be pandemonium because there's one person that's got to do all these different jobs. And if you're sailing, it's going to be pretty hard because now you got to change tack. I mean, it's not going to be easy, okay? And if it's calm seas and everything's great and it's benign in the waters, you're up in, I don't know, in Desolation Sound, where this summer, by the way, it was literally 26 degrees on Labor Day weekend. Falls overboard, you're a good swimmer. Hey, enjoy the view. Eventually someone will come and get you. Everything's good. But if you fell overboard because actually it was a storm or strong seas, one of these devices could save your life. And these devices are actually not that big. They're about this long, this big. They're actually made to put on right onto your life jacket. And they will deploy automatically once they sense that you've actually fallen into the water. And not only do they deploy automatically, what does deploy mean is they're actually going to be transmitting for like 10 or 12 hours your current GPS location via AIS to all boats in your surrounding area. So that means that if you have an AIS receiver on your boat, you're actually going to see that person as it drifts through the water, and you can lose, maybe never going to see them. You might be on a swell up, they're in a swell down, right? You could be 2 swells, could be only 500 meters from one another, you'll never see each other. Because by the time you're up, they're down, and vice versa. But that person you're going to see on your chart plotter. And the Coast Guard can see it, any other boat can see it. They're going to get a mayday, as opposed to a pan, that there's a person that fell in the water. And that automatically sees on all ships. So these little devices, West Marine were selling them. They're around. There's different companies that do it. This is one I wrote about a couple years ago. I really like it. I saw it in Fort Lauderdale at a show. And so these little devices that are AIS transponders, so they're actually broadcasting your AIS information to all other vessels that have an AIS receiver or have an AIS transponder receiver. So it's a really big safety device. You have a question?
But if that's doing it through VHF, you've got an antenna that's down here near the water surface.
It's about this big. Yeah, you don't need the crazy reach, right? Listen, if you fall in the water, you're alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, by the way, heads up, you're going to have some time to think about your life, but you're not going to be rescued, okay? You're going down and there's nobody coming. This is only for localized information. Sort of like a handheld VHF radio works, right? How big is the handheld VHF antenna? It's certainly not this long. It's this long, maybe. That antenna actually, believe it or not, actually flips over. And there's a little antenna in there. It does have some reach, but like anything, it's better than nothing. What's a better VHF antenna? On my boat, my mast is 60 feet tall. I have an antenna that's this high, dipole, right? It has some reach. On power boaters, it depends. They don't need to go like this because the boat never heel, so they're going horizontal. So it's going to be a different type of frequency. They're going to have an antenna maybe that's 4 feet on an 8 feet or 16-foot extension. Yes, of course it's better, but the question is, nobody's going to be carrying an antenna that's 4 feet on their body, so when they fall overboard. And what you're hoping is there's enough boats around you within 10 miles, which by the way, in the Strait of Georgia is not a problem because what's the longest distances in the Strait of Georgia? Maybe 30 miles, 40 miles at most, right? I mean, from the bellboy off of UBC to the pass in Gabriola is like, what, 18, 20 nautical miles? And that's assuming you're at one end. If you're in the middle, it's 10 nautical miles to either short side.
So what kind of range are we talking about?
Well, this is going to be 5, 10 nautical miles, no problem. Yeah, it's not going to give you what a VHF at the top of a mast is, but it's not 100 feet. Yeah. Price? These things go for around $200 to $300 US.
What does the icon look like on the screen?
It's going to be a person. It's a special little icon. I should have taken an image. It's actually of a person in the water, like with their hands like that. So it looks different. Yeah, so you're actually going to see an AIS person in the water, like kind of like with the water up here telling you like help. It's really useful. Yeah, just one second. It's really useful for sailing, for example, teams, racing teams, right, that sail in the middle of the night. So a lot of them are going to have those on board. Because if you fall overboard, unless you have an amazing crew, the chances of being rescued are, I mean, you have hope, but honestly, it's pretty dim. Pretty dim chances. Best is prevention, right? That's what it is. Comes out, do not fall overboard. If you do, just...
I like proper English.
Yeah, let's be honest. Yeah, go ahead. Question?
You mentioned before the interference you might get with two VHF antennas too close together.
Yeah.
Usually you carry a portable on the life vest as well. And if I picked up this, would there be interference between the handheld VHF and this?
If you were transmitting at the same time. This thing is not going to transmit every second. Remember, it's only going to transmit every 3 minutes or 6 minutes. So every 3-6 minutes, yes, you'd have interference, but not an issue. And certainly that's a good point. Like before that came on, I had a portable VHF with a built-in GPS receiver, right? The Standard Horizon came up with one, and I think it was the HX871. I bought it at the boat show 3 years ago. And that's what I would actually have in my floater jacket, a Mustang, in my pocket. It's submersible to 6 feet. If I fell overboard, assuming that I could still use my digits, and I don't know because this water, at Christmas, the water was 5 degrees Celsius this year at the surface. So that would be a shock. But assuming I'm still somewhat coordinated, I would hope to be able to press the DSC function on the radio, which is distress signal call, and that would relay my GPS position to all boats. Mind you, on an antenna only this big, but still better than nothing. And hopefully someone within that vicinity would be able to respond to my distress call. So what I was saying, designed to fit on a life jacket, flashing LEDs, so you spot, so it's got a certain battery life. It's got like, some of them have, 10 hours, 12 hours of battery life. Because like we said, like falling in the water, you're not gonna be rescued right away. You hope to, but this is a way to make it faster, but sometimes things take a lot longer than you anticipate. This is sort of what it looks like. There's different models, by the way. The antenna is barely visible. I don't know if you see it. It's this little tiny thing. It's about this big. And it's deployed automatically, meaning as soon as it senses water, there's a trigger mechanism that dissolves, and then the thing opens up. So you don't have to actually initiate or trigger it yourself. Because a lot of people, what happens is when they fall in the water, it's not a clean fall. Some people hit their head before they go in. And so that's why you need a life jacket sometimes that's going to do certain things, and that's why the headrest is there, because not everybody goes in the water consciously, right? Some of us pass out on the way into the water. The next thing I want to just show, and this was going to wrap it up, is these are the different types of apps that you can buy for free, and that's really handy if you have someone in your family, or you have your daughter, or your partner. It could be anyone, your parents. They want to know, where are you on your boat, and you have an AIS transponder. And again, it's not used for collision avoidance, it's for informational awareness into your boat location within the last, let's say, 15 minutes, assuming the AIS transponder is enabled and they did not put it in silent mode. You can look at these apps and you're going to be able to see your boat right on your phone. And that is dependent on that this boat that has an AIS transponder is not in Princess Louisa, because no signals goes into Princess Louisa. But if in there's Desolation Sound, Gulf Islands, the Broughtons, most places, there's going to be a shore VHF station that's going to pick up their signal, put it on the internet, and then you'll be able to connect with your phone to the internet, and you'll be able to see that ship's location right onto your phone. So with that, I've got probably 2 more minutes, and I'm going to have to let go because somebody else is actually picking up the next presentation. I want to thank you, everyone, and if you've got further questions, I've got displays of all of this stuff in my booth, 322 upstairs. Thank you, everyone.